EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards that should be commanders. This is going to be a real fun one. There's a lot of cards throughout the history of the game that probably should have been legendary creatures. And of course, if they are legendary creatures, then they can be commanders. This list, however, is cards that I think that definitely should be legendary creatures, but also would make good commanders, right? So for example, King Suleiman, right? 2 mana, human, noble, 1/1. He definitely should be a legendary creature, right? This should be a legendary creature. King Suleiman, I mean, come on. Tap, destroy target, Djinn, or Ifrit. That's, I don't think that makes a great commander, though. So that's why he's not on the list, right? This is a card that should be a legendary creature, but I don't think it makes a great commander. A lot of these are from Arabian Nights. In Arabian Nights, they had a lot of the, they had a lot of these historical characters or fairy tale type characters, and legendary creatures weren't a thing yet, right? So for everyone who doesn't know, Arabian Nights was actually the first set after the original Alpha, Beta, whatever, and then Antiquities, and then Legends, okay? And in Legends, this Legends set, that's when they created legendary creatures. So legendary creatures didn't actually exist. Why they didn't go back and errata it, I don't know. They should have. As a lot of people have pointed out, Walking Atlas was printed as just a creature and not an artifact creature. So, of course, they errated it because it obviously is an artifact creature. If something is obviously a legendary creature, then why not errata it, right? So that's where I'm going with this list. These are creatures that should definitely be legendary creatures, which would qualify them to be your commander. And also, I think, make interesting commanders, okay? So first off, a couple of honorable mentions. Tamanoa, Naya colors, a red, a green, and a white. This is one that people have, typically talked about because it just has such a unique ability that is easy to build around. Whenever a non-creature source you control deals damage, you gain that much life. Now, this is not on my list, and the reason it's not on my list is because I actually don't want this as a commander. I think this would be too powerful. I think that ability, so if you just think about Ancient Tomb, right? Ancient Tomb is a non-creature source that is dealing damage. So basically your Ancient Tomb taps for 2 mana and there's 0 downside, right? All lands would be like, all your Pain lands, City of Brass, there'd be 0 downside to them, right? So just that on itself, right? Your Mana Crypt is no longer going to deal you, if it deals you damage, you just gain that life rate back, so it does nothing. I think Tamanoa, for me, even though it does seem like a legendary creature and it does seem like it would make a great build around, I think it's too powerful. I don't want to actually see this as a legendary creature. I also won't be talking about the Nephilim. Again, the Nephilim are, they have pages on EDH Rec already. Lots of people have built decks with them. I had an Ink Treader Nephilim deck. I just don't think, everyone already knows about them. They've already had plenty of people building around them and making decks with them. Probably should have been legendary creatures. They all have very unique and interesting abilities, so they would make great commanders. Just didn't put them on my list because they've already sort of been talked about ad nauseum in this regard. So what's on my list? Starting out at number 10, Uncle Istvan, 1 black, human. And he's a 1/3. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to Uncle Istvan by creatures. So obviously, he's Uncle Istvan. This is a legendary creature, right? So you see what I mean. Like, how is this not a legendary creature? Originally printed in the dark, and it's funny, the old cards actually says summon Uncle Istvan. Man, it's hard not to laugh at this stuff. But, they didn't know what they were doing. They're sort of iron out the wrinkles, right? This should be a legendary creature, 100%. Also, I think it would make an interesting build around, right? You prevent all damage that would be dealt to Uncle Istvan by creatures, so maybe a Voltron commander, something like that. He makes a really good blocker. There's definitely some directions you can go with this. Coming in at number 9, Urza's Avenger. Again, I just think, it's an Avenger. He's Urza's Avenger. How many Avengers does Urza have? He's probably only got 1, I would imagine, and this is it, right? I'm assuming he built it, right? This is like a robot that Urza built. This is originally from the Antiquities set. Again, has one of those rare 0 mana abilities. Urza's Avenger gets -1/-1 and gains your choice of banding, flying, first strike, or trample until end of turn. It's a 4/4, so it's going to become a 3/3 and gain one of these abilities, but then you can give it another one. This is the interesting part. You can give it 3 of these abilities. So you can give it banding, flying, and first strike. So the banding I don't know about, right? So you can go that route if you want, but flying, first strike, and trample, you can give this -3/-3 and all flying, first strike, and trample. I think obviously you're going to go a Voltron strategy with this. Also, it is another colorless commander option, which I think, I think it's interesting to build a colorless commander deck. I don't have one personally, and I would love to have an interesting commander like this that I can build around. So it's just an interesting build around. Again, probably going to be a Voltron commander. Obviously, I think it should be a legendary creature, and I think it would be a cool commander. Coming in at number 8, Sinbad. 2 mana, human. He's a 1/1. And come on, Sinbad. It's a legendary, character in a story. I don't know the whole history of the story and everything. Pretty sure this is a character in a book. Come on, this is a legendary creature. Tap, draw a card, and reveal it. If it isn't a land card, discard it. Again, I just think that's an interesting build around, right? How would you build this deck? Sensei's Divining Top is going to be great, obviously. You probably, I would imagine, want to, make sure there's a land on top of your deck so you can always be peeling a land off the top of your deck. But maybe you don't. Maybe you have madness cards, right? If you discard it, then you can pay its madness cost, put it into play or cast it. Maybe it's something that you want in your graveyard. Just a lot of ways to build around this deck, I think. I think it would make a really interesting commander and should obviously be a legendary creature. Coming in at number 7, The Fallen, right? The Fallen. I imagine, The Fallen. Anything that has a the should probably be legendary, I would imagine, right? So 1, black, zombie. So it's going to be a legendary zombie. So you can go zombie tribal with this. It's a 2/3, and I just think it has a really interesting, unique ability. At the beginning of your upkeep, the Fallen deals 1 damage to each opponent it has dealt damage to this game. Now, obviously, it resets though, right? This doesn't go for the entire game. If this dies, if your commander, right, the Fallen dies or gets exiled, blinked, whatever, doesn't count those, right? So it has to stay on the field in order for this effect to count towards this creature, right? Once your creature dies and then you cast it again, it sort of resets this ability. Still, though, I think that it's just an interesting ability, right? You're going to connect with your opponents. It deals 1 damage to each opponent it has dealt damage to this game. I don't know. There's just a lot of ways you can deal. Again, you're dealing damage to your opponents. So you can you can't put a Curiosity on it because that would be blue, but effects like that you can do. I just think there's a lot of ways. Again, maybe this is a Voltron build. I don't know. Make it unblockable for sure is something you want to be doing. I just think it's a really interesting build around, and it should be a legendary creature. Coming in at number 6, Frankenstein's Monster. Should this be a legendary creature? Like, come on, Wizards of the Coast. Let's errata these cards, how about? This is 1000%. Everybody knows what this is. This is from The Tale, right? The old Frankenstein tale. And by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, Frankenstein is not the big monster with the bolts in its head and everything. Frankenstein is the guy, the doctor or whatever, right? He's Dr. Frankenstein. He's the guy, right? The monster is Frankenstein's monster, right? So this is what people typically think of as Frankenstein is actually this, Frankenstein's monster, which doesn't actually have a name. So again, it's a zombie, which is very significant because there is, as we all know, tons of support out there for zombie stuff, okay? It's black, and an X. You don't see too many commanders with an X in their casting cost. As Frankenstein's monster enters the battlefield, exile X creature cards from your graveyard. So already you're thinking, okay, there's lots of ways you can go with this, right? You're probably going to put Tormod in this deck. If you can't, put Frankenstein's monster into owner's graveyard instead of on the battlefield. So obviously that's not necessary, I don't think, because you're never going to do that anyway, right? For each creature card exiled this way, Frankenstein's monster enters the battlefield with a +2/+0, +1/+1, or +0/+2 counter on it. Those are counters you don't see much, right? +2/+0 and +0/+2. I mean, it's not fantastic. I just think there's, again, because you're exiling creature cards from your graveyard, that's one thing you're doing. You're putting counters on it, that's another thing you're doing. It 1000% should be a legendary creature, and I think just makes an interesting build around it. Remember, it's a zombie, so there's a lot of things you can do there with zombies as well, right? And your graveyard, right? It's zombie and manipulating your graveyard. There's just a lot there I think you could work with. Coming in at number 5, Ali from Cairo. Gee, I wonder if Ali from Cairo should be a legendary creature. I mean, come on, guys. 4 mana, 2 red, human. It's an 0/1. That's not great. But damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1, reduce it to 1 instead. That's a really powerful ability, obviously. I won't say that as long as he's on the table, you can't die, because obviously there are ways around this. right? Losing life isn't damage, so you can still lose one life. But again, it's a very powerful, unique ability that could make for an interesting build around. I don't know what you do with it exactly. In mono red, if this was black, I could think of a lot of ways to use this ability. In red, I don't know. It would be interesting though. Again, this is a creature that I think is 100% a legendary creature that also has an interesting ability that you can build around. Coming in at number 4, Ebon Praetor. And this is one that maybe right out of the gate doesn't seem super obvious as a legendary creature. However, it is an avatar Praetor. And I just thought, all those Praetors, Sheoldred, Vorinclex, right? They're all legendary creatures. And this one is an avatar on top of that. I'm just thinking it's an avatar and a Praetor. How often do you see that? For that reason, I think it should be a legendary creature, and also because of its ability, right? So it's a 6 mana for 2 black. It's a 5/5, first strike trample. Not bad, okay? However, at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a -2/-2 counter on Ebon Praetor, right? Lots of weird counters back in the day that don't exist anymore, right? So you're going to put a -2/-2 counter on it on your upkeep. So right away it becomes a 3/3 before you can even use it. That's not great. However, you can, again, you're building around this. This is your commander, so you can put like Hex Parasite in there, right? You can put stuff that removes counters from your permanents. That's going to work really good in this deck. Power Conduit is another one that you can use to remove counters and also put +1/+1 counters on stuff. That would work great in this deck as well. The second part, though, is really significant. Sacrifice a creature. Remove a -2/-2 counter from Ebon Praetor. Okay, so now you can remove that counter you just put on it by sacrificing a creature. If the sacrificed creature was a Thrall, put a +1/+0 counter on Ebon Praetor. Activate this ability only during your upkeep and only once each turn. So now we're in Thrall Tribal, right? This is another reason why I think this would make an interesting commander, and it's kind of legendary. This is Thrall Tribal, right? Thralls are not obviously a super popular tribe in the game. There's a lot of older ones. I just think this would make a really interesting build around, right? Breeding Pit immediately comes to mind for me when I saw this, right? 4 mana enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice unless you pay 2 black. At the beginning of your end step, put a 0/1 black Thrall creature token onto the battlefield, right? So you're going to be basically making that Thrall creature that you want to be sacrificing to your Ebon Praetor every turn. That's a perfect fit in the deck. Soul Exchange, a card that I just talked about one of my 10 cards videos, cares about Thralls as well. Again, you're exiling a creature, so that Breeding Pit works perfectly with this as well. You're going to recur a creature and it's going to get a +2/+2 counter on it. There's a lot of old cards like this that if you sacrifice them, if it's a Thrall, they care about sacrificing Thralls because Thralls were just great for sacrificing, I guess. So I just think this is a really interesting build around. Next up, number 3, Old Man of the Sea. I mean, it's really hard not to laugh at some of these cards. The names are just hilarious. Old Man of the Sea, how is this not a legendary creature? I don't know, it just feels like a legendary creature to me. You may choose not to untap Old Man of the Sea during your untap step. Then you tap him, gain control of target creature with power less than or equal to Old Man of Sea's power for as long as Old Man of the Sea remains tapped, and that creature's power remains less than or equal to Old Man of the Sea's power. So he's a 2/3, right? So right away, you're gaining control of a creature with power less than or equal to, so a creature with power 2 or less, you can just start gaining control of. Again, you're building around this card. I just think this is a really interesting build around. There's already a couple of commanders that you can steal stuff, other people's stuff with. This is just another one that does that. In mono blue, it's just an interesting build around. You put like a Hammer of Nazan on this, for example, right? And it's going to equip right away. Then now it's a 4/3 and indestructible. I think that would be an auto include in this deck. And you can gain control of creatures with power 4. Obviously you're going to want to, just like in any deck where you're gaining control of your opponent's creatures, you're going to want to sacrifice them, exile them, put lots of effects like that. Rishadan Pawn Shop is one, or Synod Sanctum, 2 cards that I mentioned that go great in a deck like that. You gain control of that creature and then you shuffle it into your owner's library, or you can exile it and then later gain control of it again. Just a really interesting, cool build around. Definitely should be a legendary creature. Coming in at number 2, Aladdin. Come on, how is this not a legendary creature? Please, Wizards of the Coast. I think just because of the popularity of Commander, they should be doing this, right? These cards are so obviously legendary creatures. This is Aladdin. It's the guy from the movie, from the Disney movie, from the stories, from the everything. So 4 mana, 2 red, red. He's a human rogue. That's significant. I think the fact, there is some support in red for rogues. He's a 1/1. Pay 1 red, red, and tap. Gain control of target artifact for as long as you control Aladdin. Very interesting build around. Definitely there's a lot you could do with this deck. Again, now it's Old Man of the Sea, except instead of creatures, I'm gaining control of artifacts. So again, I can do that sacrifice artifact thing, right? I can gain control of something and maybe trash for treasure, sacrifice that artifact, or Goblin Welder, right? Like I have in my Gerard deck, works fantastic in this strategy. Definitely a great build around. Definitely should be a legendary creature. Come on, Wizards of the Coast, help me out here. And coming in at number 1, Abu Jafar. I put this one at number 1 for me, just because I think it is the most interesting as a build around. Definitely should be a legendary creature. I had some guy, when I mentioned this in my General Jarkeld, I thought this was great in a General Jarkeld deck, and some guy in the comments said something about him being a leper. So I guess there is some story here. I don't know what the story is, but I guess he was a leper. Right? Leprosy, if you guys don't know what leprosy is, it was this ancient disease that killed lots of people. I think still exists, actually. So 1 mana human, right? And he's an 0/1. Whenever Abu Jafar dies, destroy all creatures blocking or blocked by it. They can't be regenerated. So I think the idea is he's got leprosy, and so if you touch him, you get leprosy, right? That was the idea. If you watched any of those old biblical movies, right? You touch him, you get it. And then you die. So I think that's the idea, is he was a leper, and if you touched him, you would get leprosy and then die as well, right? So obviously there's a story there. He clearly needs to be a legendary creature, very clearly, and I think he makes an interesting build around, right? You want him. Obviously, he's a fantastic blocker. Again, you can use Magnetic Web. Here comes Magnetic Web again to force your opponents to block him. I just think, again, could you go Voltron with this? Could you make this a Voltron commander? This would be a really interesting Voltron commander. People use Hound of Khanda a lot as a Voltron commander because it costs 1, right? It's a vanilla creature. It's a vanilla 2/2, but people think that's a great Voltron commander just because it's 1 mana and you can just get it out right away and start putting stuff on it. This could be the same way, right? This is 1 mana. Even though it's an 0/1, you're going to be putting stuff on it. So it doesn't really matter that it's an 0/1. And then that ability, it just starts destroying all your opponent's stuff. You put, again, a Hammer of Nazan on this. Now it's a 2/1 and it's indestructible. Give it Vigilance, and now it can, anything that blocks it dies. And it can block, so when it blocks something, that dies as well. You can really go to town with this. I think this would be a really, really interesting build around. And I think that people should really run with these ideas. The great thing about this format, one of the great things, there's lots, one of the great things about this format is you can do that. Like I said, I had an Ink Shredder Nephilim deck before. I know Mitch from Commander Quarters talks about how he's a rarity deck that he, his play group, I guess, lets him play. Introduce these ideas to your play group. Make the case, tell them to watch my video and be like, hey, I really want to make an Eben Praetor Thrall Tribal deck. Can I do it, guys? Come on. I really want to use Old Man of the Sea and make an Old Man of the Sea deck. I think you could easily make a case for it. I don't think your playgroup will have a problem with it. That's what's great about this format. Rule 0, you can always sort of work stuff like that out. And there's just a lot of really fun, interesting builds here, I think. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.